Today, we're diving into true Singapore horror stories. The stories you're about to hear come from a real search and rescue officer sharing some of his real-life experiences. I've been an SAR officer for a few years now, and along the way I've seen some things that I think you guys will be interested in. I have a pretty good track record for finding missing people. Most of the time they just wander off the path or slip down a small cliff and they can't find their way back. The majority of them have heard the old "stay where you are" announcements, and thus they don't wander far. But I've had a few cases where that didn't happen. These cases bothered me a lot, and I use them as motivation to search even harder on the missing persons cases I get called on. The first story is of a little boy who was out berry picking with his parents. He and his sister were together, and both of them went missing around the same time. Their parents lost sight of them for a few seconds, and in that time both the kids apparently wandered off. When their parents couldn't find them, they called us, and we came out to search the area. We found the daughter pretty quickly, and when we asked where her brother was, she told us that he'd been taken away by the bear man. She said he gave her berries and told her to stay quiet, and that he wanted to play with her brother for a while. The last she saw of her brother, he was riding on the shoulders of the bear man and seemed calm. Of course, our first thought was abduction, but we never found a trace of another human being in that area. After hours of searching the woods with no sign of the boy, we decided to question the little girl again, hoping she might remember something more about the man she'd described. But the little girl kept insisting that he wasn't a normal man, but that he was tall and covered in hair like a bear, and that he had a weird face. We searched that area for weeks. It was one of the longest calls I've ever been on, but we never found a single trace of that kid. No footsteps, no remains, nothing. I've always been a realist, and in this line of work, you get used to the idea that not every case ends with answers. But this one stayed with me. Kids always leave something behind. A footprint, a piece of clothing, a broken branch. Yet here there was nothing. No trail, no signs, no explanation. It was as if whatever took him knew exactly what it was doing. For the first time, I found myself questioning, could the bear man really exist? The other story I have is of a young woman who was out hiking with her mom and grandpa. According to the mother, her daughter had climbed up a tree to get a better view of the forest, but she never came back down. They waited at the base of the tree for hours, calling her name before inevitably calling us for help. Again, we searched everywhere, but we never found a trace of her. I have no idea where she could possibly have gone because neither her mother or grandpa saw her come down. And if she didn't come down, where else could she possibly have gone? We searched the surrounding area to see if she slipped and fell, but there was no trace of her in the vicinity. I found this case very strange, and I went a few times by myself to the same tree, searching with a canine, and every time they would lead me straight up cliffs, not hills, not even rock faces, but straight, sheer cliffs. It was as if she, somehow, came down the tree undetected and walked off the cliff. I'm sure there's an explanation for this. Maybe something I missed, but it's sort of strange. It's been years now, and she was never found. Another particularly sad case, I'm going to say, involved the recovery of a body. A 9-year-old girl fell down an embankment and got impaled on a dead tree at the base. It was a complete freak accident. But I'll never forget the sound her mother made when we told her what had happened. She saw the body bag being loaded into the ambulance, and she let out the most haunting, heartbroken wail I've ever heard. I could hear that her whole life was crashing down around her, and a part of her had died with her daughter, and apparently, according to another SAR officer, she killed herself a few weeks after it happened. Clearly, she couldn't live with the loss of her daughter. For this next incident, I was teamed up with another SAR officer because we'd received reports of bears in the area. We were looking for a guy who hadn't come home from a climbing trip like he was supposed to, and we ended up having to do some serious climbing to get to where we figured he'd be. We found him trapped in a small crevasse with a broken leg. It was not pleasant. He'd been there for almost 2 days, and his leg was very obviously infected. We were able to get him into a chopper, and I heard from one of the EMTs that the guy was absolutely inconsolable. He kept talking about how everything had been going fine during his climb. The weather was clear, his equipment was holding up, and he was making good time. But when he reached the top, he saw a man standing there. At first, he thought it was another climber, but something about him didn't add up. He wasn't wearing any climbing equipment, no harness, no ropes, nothing that suggested he'd made the same climb. Instead, the man was dressed in a parka and ski pants, clothes completely unsuitable for the conditions or the climb itself. It was as if he didn't belong there at all. He said he walked up to the guy figuring he'd greet a fellow hiker or maybe ask how he'd gotten there without any climbing gear. But when the man turned around, he realized he had no face, just a blank, smooth surface where there should have been features. He panicked, losing all sense of reason, and in his desperation to get away, he moved too quickly and lost his footing. That's how he ended up falling. But what disturbed him the most wasn't the fall. It was what he heard afterward. All night long, he said he could hear the man climbing up and down the mountain, back and forth, letting out these horrible, muffled screams that made his blood run cold. That story still bothers me to this day. I'm just glad I wasn't there to hear it. Sure, you could chalk it up to hallucinations. His brain playing tricks on him after being stuck on that mountain for 2 days, injured and exhausted. However, I started looking into past reports and incidents in that stretch of mountains. Not the exact same area, but within the vicinity. I found multiple accounts that caught my attention. None were as serious as this one, and none involved someone stranded for days, but they all carried a similar thread. Hikers coming back from their trips would report seeing strange figures in the distance, what looked like humans, but something about them seemed off. Some thought they were seeing someone in distress, possibly stuck or injured, and reported it so that we could check it out. But these people were often described as not having proper hiking equipment, or just standing still, not responding when called to. Others said they looked weird enough, maybe injured or with something wrong about their face, that the hikers chose not to approach. What's eerie is that these descriptions, scattered across different accounts, align disturbingly well with the story this guy told. It's too much of a pattern to just dismiss. Sure, we could write it off as coincidence, a mix of overactive imaginations and the isolation of the wilderness. But when the details line up like that, you can't help but wonder, is it really just a coincidence? Now, this next incident is one of the scariest things I've ever had happen to me. This involved the search for a young woman who'd gotten separated from her hiking group. We were out until late at night because the dogs had picked up her scent. When we found her, she was curled up under a large rotted log. She was missing her shoes and bag, and she was clearly in shock, She didn't have any injuries, and we were able to get her to walk with us back to base ops. Along the way, she kept looking behind us and asking us why that big man with black eyes was following us. We looked around and we couldn't see anyone, so we just wrote it off as some weird symptom of shock. But the closer we got to base, the more agitated this woman got. She kept asking me to tell him to stop making faces at her. At one point, she stopped and turned around and started yelling into the forest, saying that she wanted him to leave her alone, that she wasn't going to go with him, and she wouldn't give us to him as well. After some struggle, we finally got her to continue moving, but then we started hearing these weird noises coming from all around us. Being in the woods at night, we have heard so many different kinds of sounds over the years, and we have sort of gotten used to all of those that now we can almost identify with a certain degree of certainty, the likely source. But this sound was different. It didn't seem to belong in the woods. It sounded almost like coughing, but more rhythmic and deeper. It was almost insect-like. I don't really know how else to describe the sound. When we were within sight of base ops, the woman slowly turns to me, and her eyes are about as wide as I can imagine a human could open them. She then touches my shoulder and says, "He says to tell you to speed up. He doesn't like looking at the scar on your neck." I have a very small scar on the base of my neck, but it's mostly hidden under my collar, and I have no idea how this woman saw it. As soon as she said it, and while it took me a second to really grasp her words, but before I could even react, I heard it, the cough, right by my ear. I froze, every hair on the back of my neck standing. It wasn't distant. It wasn't fading. It was there, close. I didn't think, I didn't look back. I just moved. I got her back to ops as quickly as I could, trying hard not to let on how shaken I was. Even now, I still think about that sound and how it stayed with me long after we left the area that night. But I have to say, I was really happy when we left that night. For some reason, the air felt less heavy and just better. This is the last one I'll tell, and it's probably the weirdest story I have. Now, I don't know if this is true in every SAR unit, but in mine, it's sort of an unspoken, regular thing we run into. You can try asking about it with other SAR officers, but even if they know what you're talking about, they probably won't say anything about it. We've been told not to talk about it by our superiors, and at this point, we've all gotten so used to it that it doesn't seem weird anymore. The first time I saw it, I didn't know what to think. We were deep in the wilderness, about 30 or 40 miles in, and I spotted a staircase. It was just there, standing in the middle of the woods like it belonged. It wasn't anything fancy, just a regular staircase, but it was strange because it was exactly like the one I have in my house. I asked one of the senior officers about it. He told me, without missing a beat, that it was normal. He said, "Don't worry about it, just keep moving." And when I pressed a bit further, he looked at me with this strange, almost guarded expression. It wasn't the response I expected, and I could tell there was something more to it. At first, I thought maybe I was just homesick. I had just joined the team, and it had been a while since I'd been home. Maybe I was hallucinating, I thought. But after that conversation and seeing how secretive he was about it, it didn't sit right with me. If it was just nothing, why would they act like that? It made me wonder, was it just a hallucination? Or was there something else going on? After that, I started noticing it more. Every time we ventured deep into the woods, It was always the same thing. Stairs that looked exactly like the ones I had at home. And I'll admit, part of me wanted to go up to them, to see what was at the top, but I never did. I was told never to approach them, and I learned quickly not to ask questions about them anymore. No, I just see them and ignore them. It happens so often that it's almost like it's part of the landscape. But sometimes, I wonder, am I the only ones seeing stairs? Do other SAR officers see their stairs too? What would happen if someone actually climbed them? What if there's a reason we're told not to go near them? A reason that no one wants to talk about? I don't know. The mind tends to wander, but I've learned to leave it at that. I know better now than to ask questions. But sometimes, I wonder if there's something more to it. Alright, that's it for this week from Supernatural Secrets. Those were stories shared by a real SAR officer from Singapore. If you enjoy diving into these eerie tales, make sure to leave us a like and subscribe. We've got more chilling stories coming your way every week from different countries and different corners of the supernatural. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and may the mysteries of the supernatural continue to captivate your imagination. This is Supernatural Secrets signing off.